Hi, Karen. Okay, can you hear me? How is my audio? Oh, it's better? Okay, excellent. Excellent, excellent. Good. Oh, I'm so glad. So, we, we've got one person, which is better than no people. I sounded like a slow motion robot. Awesome. Okay. Um, all right. So here we are. It's you and me. Oh, goodness gracious. I feel so bad about that. Anyway, here we are, and I just goofed up. Apparently, I don't know how to deal with the time change. That's happened to me before. Also, also in a public setting. So, I feel like I feel like I'm doing if I'm doing an event in a different time zone, I need to get a personal assistant involved because I just can't I can't manage on my own. Hey, we got two people. Someone came back. Thank you for coming and finding it. Again, my sincere apologies um, for that. That's I'm sorry, but I'm glad that Karen helped me out, bailed me out. Hey, welcome, Ishibi. Thanks for returning and finding the new feed. Oh, hearts. All right, so let's talk about what I've been working on this week. It's I don't have my tropical leaf car throw with me, but I do have the printout in another room. I am about probably 3/4 of the way done with it, and so I'm nearing the top of the double wing. And if I probably had about another 3 days worth of knitting, I would finish the body of it, and then I could go and start working on the borders. But I'm not at home right now, as you all know, because um, of this botched YouTube live. I'm on vacation, so I brought some other knitting with me to work on, and and sometimes when I go on trips, I take way too many skeins of yarn. Like I think, oh, I should bring like 6 full skeins of yarn just because, like lace weight yarn, because of course I can knit that much in a week, right? Like of course I need 4,000 yards of yarn to knit in 1 week. And so this time I restrained myself and I just brought a little bit. I brought like I think I brought 100 grams of it's like a silky wool. And then I brought about 75 grams of, um, this is from Discovery of Stitches. It's a long, like a color pooling yarn. And so it's got like a lot of black and then a whole lot of blue. And so what I've been doing this week is trying to figure out um, modular knitting in conjunction with pooling yarn. And I've done a little bit with that. I put out a pattern of, I don't know, about 6 months ago or so, and it was called the No Breaks Cowl, and it used this pooling yarn to make a lovely, lovely cowl that had like all these interesting color bars in it, and it didn't have any yarn breaks. And so the great thing about that was that is it looks really complicated, but it's not. And so essentially, you can have this super complicated project, and at the end, can you see that picture? Oh, come on. There we go. Let's try that. What the heck? Maybe if I hold my finger on it. There. At the end, you only have literally two. ends to weave in, the beginning end and the end. And so you'd think there'd be like a gazillion ends to weave in with this, but there's not. There's two. And so I've been kind of wanting to explore that idea. And I had done a blue and black sweater a few weeks ago that I showed off that used the same yarn, but I had some left over. And so I wanted to see again what would happen if I use the modular squares. These aren't mitered, these are just modular, but I did them in this long like color pooling kind of yarn. I guess it would be like self-striping if I was going in a circle or like making socks or something. So I wanted to experiment with the modular knitting in conjunction with the pooling yarn, but to twist it up in a little bit more, I'm not doing this in garter stitch. And normally everything from number knitting is in garter stitch. And I thought, what would happen if I did it in a different stitch pattern stitch? And so I tried it with herringbone stitch. And what's cool about that is that it's normally if you just do garter stitch back and forth, you get these little color blips on the back side, or I guess on the front side, you get the little color blips from wherever, the blue is on one row and the black is on the other. But when you're doing it in this herringbone stitch, it's essentially like sort of like a stockinette stitch. So there's no color blips. So another cool thing about this is that, so garter stitch is at it's two ridges for every stitch wide. So it's double the width as it is the height. And so if you want to get a square, you knit 40, let's just say 40 stitches by 40 ridges, which is 80 rows, and you'll get a square. And that 2-to-1 proportion is just magical. But if you choose a different stitch pattern that's got a different stitch ratio, the number of rows to stitches, it's going to vary. And I think normally in stockinette stitch, it's about maybe 4 stitches wide by like 3 rows high. And so it's kind of squatty. Like if you've ever looked at like knitter's graph paper, that's not the squares, but like for charting fair isle, a lot of knitters will use this. The squares are not square, they're like these little squatty rectangles, and the shape isn't right, but the proportion is right. So you can get like a reasonable facsimile of what your knitting is going to look like if you chart it on that graph paper that's like 4 wide by 3 high. Okay, so I wanted to see what would happen if I did it in herringbone. And I found that roughly herringbone stitch, because if you've never knit herringbone before, it's a horizontally compressed stitch. And so if you got like say 40 stitches on the needle, you're going to insert into 2 of the stitches, wrap your yarn around as if to knit, bring the loop through, just pop off 1 of those stitches. And so then again, you put your needle knitwise into 2 stitches, draw through a loop, and just take off 1 stitch. And so each stitch is knit twice. And so what that does is it like horizontally compresses the whole fabric. And what's really cool about that is that because garter stitch has got like it's 2 wide by 1 high in rows to stitches, but herringbone is more like, not entirely, but it's like 2 wide by 2 high. And so if I knit, I think this was like, I don't know, 16 or 20 stitches of herringbone, and then I knit 20 rows of herringbone, it's going to give me roughly a square, not entirely. Hey, Stephanie. Not entirely, but it's close. It's close enough. And if you've ever knit herringbone, like the pattern books say that it's really good for like dress jackets. Like it used to be used really commonly for dress jackets, like in the 40s and 50s. And now people use it a lot for like pillow cushions because it's a very dense fabric and it's not super stretchy because it's, just because of the way that it's knit. But like when you take the herringbone and then you knit it in conjunction with the modular units, which are of themselves, they have this crossway tension. it has an interesting effect. Now, Mishi B asked, what about picking up the stitches on the sides though? It's that's about where I got where I got stuck because like if you have a garter stitch square and you cast on 20 and then you do the slip stitches on the edge, so you got this nice, you got 20 cast on stitches and then you've got 20 chain stitches on the edge, and then you go on to pick up the next one and you pick up 20. It's like easy peasy. And no joke, when I went to like pick up on the side of one of these things, I screwed it up, I don't know, at least 2 or 3 times, and I kept having to rip it out. I'm like, what in the world? Like, what's going on? Because if I am picking up, I got my 20 stitches, and normally I would knit 20 rows high, but I've got, I can't, I only need to attach it every other row, right? And so I would only need to attach it 10 times if I've got 20 stitches on my square that I'm working with. And so that's about where I lost all mental ability to process. And we had like a 17-hour flight that day or something ridiculous. And I got to that point and I was like, well, I can't even think straight. Like I don't even know what state I'm in anymore. So like surely I can't, like I can't count to 10 to attach the side of a square. I couldn't do it. But yeah, so if you're going to be using in your modular knitting, if you're going to be using a stitch pattern that's different than garter stitch, because garter stitch is easy, easy to pick up, right? So this is, I think, got 40. So, there's 40 stitches here, 40 stitches here to pick up, easy. But if you're using a stitch pattern that either doesn't have this beautiful little chain stitch edge, or the proportions are like not like the perfect either 1-to-1 or like 2-to-1 ratio, watch out. Like write some notes down first, because like if you just go on autopilot like I did for hours, I knit on this and I kept screwing it up. Yeah, you'll just have to rip it out. And then when I discovered it, I got so disappointed. I was like, well, shoot, I'll just cast on something else, because that whole idea didn't work out. I mean, I guess it was a really great learning experience, because like how else would I have known the stitch ratio of herringbone stitch? So that was fun. Oh goodness. So other things I've been experimenting with this week. One moment. I'm going to grab my knitting book, number knitting book. Oh dear, so professional. Okay. Oh, so I got my printouts also. So I'm about right here in my point on the blanket, in case you're wondering. All right, so got my number knitting book. And I had talked last week about the section in the back, To the Adventurous Knitter, and it's pages and pages of stories and theory, and it's a great read. And so what I've been exploring this week is on page 260. She's got it's like this kind of a chart, but it's giving you different ways to organize your mitered squares, like different placements of them. And I think the idea of orienting mitered units is pretty common, like different orientations is pretty common in quilting, because they're all just like cut pieces and you can like rotate them however the heck that you want. But in mitered modular knitting, the idea of rotating these mitered squares at different angles is a lot less common. And I think that's because we're dealing with a continuous ball of yarn. And as knitters, we know that like we have to be concerned about how, like where to break the yarn, when to break the yarn. And we know like if we break it too much, we're going to have an ungodly amount of ends to weave in. Nobody likes that. And so we want to be very cognizant of how we orient those units. And I think a lot of knitting patterns, they are very consistent and not super adventuresome in the way that they orient their mitered squares. And I think probably part of that is because of those like built-in considerations that we as knitters have with breaking the yarn and weaving in ends. Like even if it's never mentioned, I think that's a pretty common consideration. And so I'm on page 260, and she's got several different ways to orient the units, and several of these are in her book, like the ski tracks design and the fountain design. Like you'll see these orientations used in her blankets and sweaters, but these are really good like jumping off points for different ways to do your shapes. And I would recommend that maybe you like print out a copy of this, or like maybe draw your own and then use colored pencils to color in different, like if you're going to knit each mitered square in a different color or a portion of different colors, this could be a really good design tool for you. And so saying all that, I decided to explore a little bit of kind of that concept. I'm on page 271 now, and she's got original original designs. And in these original designs, like none of the charts are in here in this book for any of the things in this chapter. Now, if you can, if you're experienced enough, you can figure it out just by looking at them. But I thought it would be fun to try to knit some of these items. So I'm starting with this one up here. And this is called the Wall of Troy muffler scarf. And it's essentially 4 mitered squares. And so you cast on with the dark, and then you work the light, and then you cast on and then pick up in the dark and work the light, and you just repeat that pattern, and it gives you sort of like this Greek kind of a style. And what's cool about that is that the proportions of this, like I've done some experimenting where I have the mitered square, and I'll knit half of it in one color and half of it in the other, but I haven't done a whole lot where I have a single mitered square and I start with one color entirely, and then I pick up with the next color and knit the rest of it. And so I was playing around with that. And so this was my first attempt at the Wall of Troy muffler scarf, and my tension's a little bit loosey goosey here, so I don't know if I'm going to keep this. I think I might rip it out. But what's interesting about this is you can make this as big as you want. The proportions are 3. The lighter section needs to be 3 times as wide or as long as the dark section. And so this is a 48 stitch square. So I cast on 48 plus 48, and then I work 12 ridges, and then I work, then I switch to the light pink, and then I work 6. What's 48? What's 48 minus 12? 36. Oh my gosh. Who needs a math teacher? This girl. My husband's laughing at me in the background. Oh dear. Yeah, that would be a good knit along, because this is like pretty non-intimidating. Like, can you knit and purl? Then yes, you can do this. This is not complicated. And what I was going to do is instead of just the scarf, I thought it would be fun to, I mean, because I think it's 4 the original scarf is like 4 squares wide. And so if this is about 8 inches, 8 times 4 is 32. That would be about 32 inches around. So I thought I'd make maybe 6 of these and make like an infinity cowl kind of a thing. Um, that was my thought. It may or may not ever happen, um, because I don't plan. As you know, I had good plans, good intentions today for showing up on time. Um, but so like what happens is I'll buy a ball of pink yarn, in this case, 2 balls of 2 different colors of pink yarn when I'm out, like out on a road trip somewhere with no idea of what I'm going to do with it. And then it'll sit in my stash for like a year, and then I'll be like, I know what to do with it, but I don't have enough of it to do anything. And so then I go on a yarn shop website that that stores all the colors, I think like yarn.com or something, and I'll get like enough for the one project that I need, but then I'll have more in my stash, and then I'll pick it up and I'll try to, a couple of years later and try to do something else with it. So it's just like this vicious cycle of not planning. Anyway, that the infinity cowl may or may not ever happen, but it is a great, it would be a great knit along, and it's super easy, super easy. This would be really good for stash busting. You could also do, instead of just like one stripe in the corner, you could do like 2 stripes, or have like the a larger section here be dark. I've seen someone knit a sweater like that. They did one of the, I think it was the diamond design sweater, and instead of all of the squares being one color, she did them in, striped variations like this, which was very cool. All right, the next thing I was working on this week was along the same lines of this, because if I know, like, if I'm knitting this, I'm gonna have to have 2 yarn breaks, right? One for the pink, one for the white, because when I go to, pick up again, I can't just strand it all across. That's going to be not very tidy. But I've done enough stranded color work knitting. I'm not very good at it. My tension's too tight, but I've done enough to know, like, you can take yarn and strand it across a little ways with no ill effects. Stephanie says that would be pretty as a border on a blanket or a trim on a garment or cuffs and collars. This one, like this whole idea of the stripes, is that what you're talking about? If so, I agree. Um, what I what I tried next with was doing the same proportions of the, 1/4 dark color and 3/4 lighter color, but in smaller squares, to see what would happen. And it was moderately successful. I'm not super thrilled with it. So another thing that I was trying to do with this is, if you're familiar with have any of you knit the mulberry bush blanket from the book Mulberry Bush? It is on, let's find it. It was one of her earliest designs. Here it is. It would be a good travel project. And again, the chart is a little hard to see, but notice the diagonals on this. What's really cool about this is it starts in the center and works concentrically. So you go 1, 2, 3, and you just work around and round, but you're doing mitered squares the whole time. And so the angle at which you are doing the diagonal, it keeps changing, and it's very cool. And the lambs and butterflies blanket is based on that same idea of it's mitered squares worked concentrically counterclockwise, but it's got these little shapes built into it, like the sheep and the lambs and the green grass and all that. It's crazy. And so I like to explore the idea of working working the mitered squares counterclockwise because it's nice. You don't have to break the yarn. You just keep going and going and going. And it makes for a really interesting design. And she has a few on page 103. She's got some different examples of how you can knit these. And again, they're all, if you notice the diagonals, they're all going to be kind of like radiating like leaves, like veins on a leaf. And but what she has you in her, I think in the one page earlier, she talks about like if you rotate your if alternate your color each time, but still working counterclockwise, you'll get these really interesting kind of random looking patterns, which is fun. Okay, so back to this idea. And so I've got my mitered square with the cast on edge, worked in one color, and then the rest of it worked in another color. But I combined that with the idea of working these mitered squares in the mulberry bush pattern, which is counterclockwise, concentric. And I wanted to see how far it would go and like if it would hurt my brain to knit it. And it was a little tough, because what happens is when you have to sometimes float the yarn, from like if I need to go from this unit and the next place I need to knit is like up here or maybe down here because it's worked, concentrically counterclockwise. So there is these little yarn floats that you have to deal with sometimes, which is not a huge deal. It can be a little bit of a pain, but um, yeah, it didn't work quite like I thought it would. So I then tried knitting like back and forth the same idea with the mitered squares, and that was even more frustrating. So I think this is just like a good lesson learned. I don't know. I'll file it away for another day. All right. So I've been working on something very special today. Let me see if I can find it. Um, there was some articles, and I'll link to them down in the description. There was some articles in Piecework magazine a few years ago about number knitting, and when Virginia's son passed away, they had an estate sale, and there was a bunch of his mom's books there, and I think this was like an '04 maybe, and some of her garments that she's knitted that like patterns were never released for, or they were lost to history. And there's a couple of researchers that wrote some articles about it for Piecework, and um, so I wanted to show one of those garments. This is called, and this was a photograph from an art exhibit in Moorhead, Minnesota. I'm not exactly sure when. I think it was like 2015 or 2016. But this is one of the garments that she made, and she sold a pattern for it into, I think it was McCall's Needlework. Um, I don't know when. That's all the details that I have. It was a pattern, not a number knitting book, sold separately to McCall's. And I would suspect that this was probably post 1952 because her book came out in 52. But she does things with this sweater that are like beyond what she ever did in number knitting. And she did a lot with number knitting, but this is more than she ever did in the published book of number knitting, which is wild. So I wanted to explain some of the things that are in here that are so amazing. And just so you all know, My husband and I are working on a new setup where I can have one camera on me and one camera on my hands, and I can also show you what's on my screen so I can flip back and forth. That is in the works because me holding up my book to the screen and trying to look around and talk to you all, that's that's gonna be short-lived. So thanks for your patience. We're gonna get our tech up our tech game. So that's in the works. Okay, so what's in here that isn't in number knitting, the book, is first of all, it's a cardigan. And in the original number knitting book, there's like everything is a pullover. It's either got sleeves or no sleeves. There is one there's a couple of baby jackets that just kind of like fold in front. Maybe they have buttons. I don't even know if they have buttons, but there are no adult cardigans in number knitting at all. They're all pullovers or cape jackets or anything, but like nothing like this in number knitting in the book. Another thing she did here that's really interesting is that she's got this little peplum here, and she's got a couple of those, like they kind of make the front of the sweater stick out a bit, but there's two in front, and I'm guessing there's two in back because I think that's generally the way peplums work. Um, and so what I did today is I sat down, I decided, I've heard people online saying, sadly, this pattern, like there's no chart. Like how sad there's no chart for this pattern because it's gorgeous. I would totally wear that. It's beautiful. There's no chart. And I was like, you know what? I'm on vacation. I got time. I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna chart this thing out. And so I spent probably a good 4 hours today and this is my only reference photo. That's it. And so I spent some time today working on this. And so this is called the Hampton cardigan. And she's got three Hampton sweaters in the number knitting book. There's the Hampton vest for men. There's two women's adaptations of that are also in there. One of them has like little sleeves, and one of them is like sleeveless. And there's also, so I'll show you those real quick. There's the Hampton vest. It's starting in the section called Costume Design for Men and Women. It's on page 198. Almost there. With my new setup, I'll just be able to show you my screen and do a Command F and just do a keyword search for whatever I'm looking for. It's going to be awesome. It is haute couture. I agree. She's amazing. All right, so here's the first one. This is called the Hampton vest. And it's if I remember that I showed you that that pattern, like the list of different types of ways to arrange mitered squares. It's called the ski tracks design. But anyway, it's easy, up and over the shoulders, fits great. This doesn't have any, like all her women's sweaters have got needle gauge shifting, needle size changes for the bust. This one didn't, and it still fits great. And this is what it looks like flat. And then here is the Hampton shirt. And what's not apparent here is that these are two different sweaters. One of them is like got these little cap sleeves, and one of them has got like more full size sleeves. But what's interesting about this is that there's these little underarm gussets right there. And if you look at this sweater, it's also got those underarm gussets. So I had to figure out how to knit this because in normal, like, everyday popular knitting, people would like, if you were to ask someone, like, "How do you knit a sweater?" You know, they'd probably give you, like, 2 answers, like, well, you can go from the bottom up and then knit the back, you know, from the bottom up, or you can go from the top down. I even have a whole book called Sweaters from the Top Down or Top Down Sweaters or something. Sometimes maybe people will get adventuresome and they'll go, like, sleeve to sleeve. Um, Bellamy did one that, I've mentioned it before. It's the diamond design sweater for men, and it starts at the front hip and goes up diagonally over the shoulder to the back hip. It's like a corner to corner, so that was pretty wild. But as I was looking, at this sweater, I determined that this is not knit like any of the other sweaters. What she did, as best as I could determine, she started at the right sleeve and she knit the sleeve and then knit toward the center, this like on the center front, and then did the button band, and then, you know, did some of the back, and then went over to the other sleeve and knit from the right sleeve over, and then filled in the back, and then filled in the right front with the button band, and then did the gussets kind of at the end. So she did sort of like an outward in approach to this sweater, which I've never seen her do before. Of course, I haven't knit all of her sweaters in the book. I've mostly knit the short sleeved ones, but there's some on there's like the gentle jacket. So I'm not familiar with all of her constructions, but as far as the ones where it's a whole bunch of individual units that kind of like make up the sweater, as opposed to like one, you know, big mitered square for the back and another big mitered square for the front, um, is that's kind of like in a different category, I feel like. But as far as the ones that are made up of a bunch of different units, I haven't seen this construction before where she works from the sleeve, like the sleeves inward. That was really interesting to me. So I sent that off to my friend Anita. I think she's in Germany. I'm not entirely sure. So Anita is a retired land surveyor and technical illustrator. And like she can do, you know, CAD drawings and all that, just brilliant draftsperson. And like if I'm ever having problems charting something, I will send it to Anita and Anita will be like, oh yeah, you can, you know, you illustrate it like this. And I was like, that's amazing. So Anita immediately found a little issue with my chart and I sent it back to her again. Um, I've already got a pattern tester lined up. And so if you are feeling brave and want to test out an untested chart for this, hit me up. I probably won't knit it along with you, but if you want a challenge and you're feeling adventuresome, do let me know because I will make this chart available for you and we can see how it goes. I would imagine there's probably some little kinks we'll need to work out along the way. Um, that's all right though. I think the term for this that I've heard other historians use is like experimental archaeology, where you just, you know, try to figure out and do something as historical people once did, but not necessarily like having the step-by-step procedure or even like knowing all the instructions. You're just like kind of piecing it together and going for it and trying to figure it out as you go along. And so that's what I feel like that's what this whole number knitting book is. Um, it's one big experiment, which is super fun. So that's what I've been working on this week. How far have you all gotten on your tropical leaf car throws? So another thing I've been working on this week is trying to track down some of those pattern pamphlets that are mentioned, um, that Bellamy published. She both before she did number knitting and I suspect after she published number knitting, she published pattern pamphlets through McCall's Needleworks primarily. And McCall's went through, I did some research on Wikipedia last night. It went through several changes of hands over the decades. And then Rosie O'Donnell took it over in '01, and the whole thing was shut down in '02. And so the company, as many 100-year-old companies are, it's not in existence anymore. And so there's not like a warehouse that I could just go search through their archives. Um, and try to find these things. Like for example, if I wanted to search for like archival Levi's, like the Levi's company is still there and they've got archives. Like I could just like they probably wouldn't let me in, but like the idea of being able to go to a company's archives and search through them um, doesn't really exist for publishers as much as it does for like physical products, I feel like. So I did find a pattern, a pamphlet from McCall's Needlework at some point. I don't know what year, but it's in a library. It's a university library, I think, in Illinois. And I contacted them to see about getting a copy. It's in their rare books and manuscripts section of the library. And they told me it's for in-house use only. Like they don't lend it out. Like they won't just ship it to me. And like, well, that's good. So they won't ship it to me because it's probably the only one left in existence. Um, so I asked for a digital copy, and they said that I'd need to contact my own local library and request a digital copy or a photocopy through an interlibrary loan. So I have to figure that out because I've done interlibrary loans a lot of times, but I've never been able to like get a photocopy of something that way. So I'm going to have to call my local library and get their assistance with that. um, if you are in the market for a hard copy of number knitting, there is one up for sale on eBay right now. I think they're asking like $268 for it, but it's for sale. I put it on my watch list, and within a few hours, she sent me a 5% discount. So it was like $14 off. Come on. Um, if it was more, I might have purchased it, but I already have one. So um, yeah, I also found that there was another book I need to get. It's called The Hidden History of American Fashion. And before my research this week, I had never heard of that before. But the only reason I found it is because I did a pretty thorough Google search for Virginia Woods Bellamy in quotes, just to see what would come up, what would result. And there's a number of different books that mention her and number knitting, but this one is is really is really interesting to me, and so I'm probably just going to buy a copy so I can have it in my library. And the whole idea, just based on the brief bit that I read online about it, is it's because fashion is so people view it as temporal, and clothing is made to be worn and thrown away or used up or whatever, donated. The whole idea of having like a historical record of garments throughout the ages, I mean, they're so easily lost to history because we just like throw them away. And Karen had sent me a link to the Cornell, I think it's the Cornell Textile um, museum collection. Maybe I've never been in grad school to like know officially what it's called. Hey Bob. um but I believe it's yeah, Karen says yes, it's the textile collection, and I just did some searching on there, and again I will put a link to that in the description down below when I'm done. But so I did a search for knitting, and some things came up, and then I did a search for knit, and a bunch more stuff came up. And so you can do a search by keyword, by construction method. And it wasn't just like, old stuff. It was like newer stuff. Like they had stuff from like the 1300s, which is amazing. But then they also had stuff from like the 1800s and the 1900s. And then, when I did the search for the word knit, one of the things that really struck me was there was like a leotard from like 1984. Like I was wearing leotards in 1984 and we didn't keep them, because I was a kid. We just like grew out of them and threw them away. But like someone took the time to save leotards from like the 70s and 80s and not just keep them, but like donate them to a historical textile collection, which is like, well, that's actually a pretty good idea because I like to watch. I was a gymnast, and so like I watched the old videos of the Olympic gymnasts like back in the 70s, and the leotards that they wore back then totally different. The construction, the fit is absolutely 100% totally different than what we not we no than what the athletes wear today. And so the idea of someone saving that historical record of a leotard from 30 or 40 years ago was like, well, that's a pretty good idea. Like we should do more of that. And so this textile collection, they it's always growing, and I think it's like the job of the grad students to go and take pictures of these objects, and they're not necessarily like you know awesome photos. They're a little, they're like old leotards and stuff. And so they take a photo. So there is at least a photo record. And then they'll do like a description of the era. And sometimes it's a specific year. Sometimes it's like just a general decade. So they'll do like a description of the item, how it was constructed, what color it is, what decade it come from. And it's in the archival record at Cornell, which is awesome. So that's a really good resource that I'm going to be using more, and I think it would be fun to go there someday and go through. And I don't know how this works. Like, do they just let people go through the textile archives? I doubt it. Especially like just for an eager beaver, like not somebody that's like an official researcher, because I'm not. I've I don't. Oh, Karen says you have to make an appointment. Well, shoot. I'm going to New York this coming fall. Finally, I think I'm finally going to go to Rhinebeck, and Cornell's not that far. So maybe I'll just like, um, I'll book an appointment and I'll go see the textile collection, because that would be amazing. So one of my I say all that because this whole idea of recreating this sweater and redoing the chart, it kind of struck me after I got that link to the textile archives, because like this photo is literally the only record that we have of this, and this garment exists somewhere in the private collection of a fiber artist in Moorhead, Minnesota, who I've been unable to contact. Incidentally, I've tried, but she's got several of Bellamy's garments, and had she not like put them in a museum, they would just be anonymous. And I think the only reason they were in the museum is she was, the woman who owns these was contacted by some actual like academic textile researchers, to try to find out, more about the garments and like who in the community got things from the estate sale. And so I feel like, if I can do my one little part to help save the history of this garment, and you know what it was, and who was behind it, like I want very much to do that. Karen says you could bequeath your collection to that museum at Cornell. It would be a great way to preserve Bellamy's voice. Oh, that's a good idea. Um, I could do that. Yeah. I'll, so I will have, I don't know what the paperwork is involved for that, because I'm not going to do it right now. Maybe when I'm old or dead. I'll leave instructions for my family about what to do with my number knitting stuff. But yeah, that's a good idea. That is a very good idea. Because I do very much want her voice to be remembered. I've done so much research on number knitting, and you know, there's a few articles, maybe like a handful of articles. Well, actually 2, maybe 3 that I can think of that were like actually, you know, in like Piecework magazine, and I think Knitting Traditions is I think another one, and those are both owned by, I don't remember the name of the parent company, but those are both owned by the same company. And I've seen a few blog articles that talk about number knitting, but I haven't seen like, you know, anyone attempt to undertake like the whole thing, like all that Bellamy has to say and all that she has to teach us. Like that's what I want to save. And so that's what the point of all this is about. Yes. Karen says it would provide a reference source for future on Bellamy's work. I agree. I agree. And it's, I have seen a few people, like before I really started diving into number knitting and like putting all the patterns in Ravelry and promoting it and all that. I saw she had, I think, two patterns in Ravelry. One of them was the mulberry bush blanket, and one of them was it was basically it was like a 3 mitered squares, 1, 2, 3, and they were going at opposing angles. And that was what was mentioned in one of those Piecework articles. So there was a whopping 2 total patterns that were like out in the wild that like were available for modern day knitters that didn't already have a copy of this book. And there's so much. There's so much to learn. And I've been working on it since '08. Anyway, when I was working on this today, my mind was blown. This is crazy. I've never seen anything like this. And I keep thinking like surely I've seen everything that that she has to teach us. No, I have not. Let me show you another little something from I've mentioned her earlier, from Anita. She's the lovely knitter out in Germany. Let me find the English version. Yes. Anita, you're amazing. Because she's a drafts person, she has come up with her own shapes. So you're probably familiar with the idea of the 7 shapes. I'm gonna have to cover up my face for this to focus. The 7 shapes of number knitting. So we got the square, rectangle, triangle, right, left, and center. We've got the mitered triangle, the mitered square, and the single wing and the double wing. Well, Anita has come up with more shapes, and she's named them all. And I don't know the math for all of these. Like, you know, the 45 and 90-degree angles are pretty basic. Like I can understand that. But as far as these ones here, I need to do, especially these kites, I think she calls them kites. I need to do some more exploring on the math for those. And so I'll probably be referencing the Woolly Thoughts book for that. Because the Woolly Thoughts book discusses quite a bit of the increase and decrease ratio required to get non 45-degree angles. And I have one more thing that I want to show from Anita. This is amazing. So throughout number knitting, I'll show you the number knitting equivalent of this for reference to help you explain how much further Anita has taken the concept of symbols. Let's see, there's a section in the book called Rules, Symbols, and Abbreviations. I need to find it. It's brief. I think briefer than it probably could be now. All right. Almost there. All right. And this is admittedly a little hard to see, but um, there's a little squiggle up here, and that means to break yarn. There's a tiny little extender line right there. That means the start of the yarn. And so there's just very subtle little clues on some, not all of the patterns about what to do, extra information that can be included in a graphical format without having to type it all out. And so what Anita did, Anita's a rock star. This is amazing. Forgive me. This is in German. I can't find the English one right now. Can you see this? Cover up my face. So she's come up with symbols for knitted on cast-ons, picked up cast-ons, drop yarn to save for later. She's got about probably, I don't know, 15 or 20 different symbols that she has come up with for just her own benefit when she's charting out her patterns. And it's amazing. This is amazing. So I asked Anita if I could show this, and she said yes. And if I could use it in the patterns, and she said yes. And so this kind of, I know it's amazing. This kind of contribution is going to add to the overall, like the kind of a crowdsourced hive knowledge that we have for modular knitting. And it's just, oh my gosh, I'm just so excited that we've got so many people chiming in. I think her native language is German. I'm not entirely sure. I think it's German. It's whatever probably this language is, because I don't know what that language is. Yeah. So if you know what language that is, type a note in the comments, because I don't know what language that is. I think it's German. Um, yeah, so these symbols that Anita has come up with it's amazing. And it's really going to add to the um, ability of knitters probably around the world that can knit these patterns without having to rely on an English-based chart, which I think is really an intriguing idea. And so let me show you what I spent the better part of today on. And again, this hasn't been tested and it's on my iPhone. I'm really sorry about that. Oh, language? Oh, okay. It's Norwegian. All right. So here is the chart for the Hampton cardigan. It starts on one side and it works its way over, does some of the back, and then picks up in the front, does some front, and then it comes over on the sleeves again, works over, um, and fills in the front. This is my best approximation at how this sweater was constructed. And it's got these little triangle peplums here, which is a different type of technique that I've never seen her use before. Yeah, and the reason the shaping on it is so good, if you look at the original pattern, it's very tailored. It's lovely. It's great. Um, like most, or actually like all of her female sweater patterns, she uses gauge shifting, and so the needles that the needle sizes. These are U.S. needle sizes that are listed here on the side. Those correspond to the row. So like, these units are knit on 8, 8, these ones are knit on 10s. And then you go back up here and you go down some, 8s, except for the sleeves. I'm guessing that those are going to be knit on 9s. And so the shaping throughout is obtained by the needle size. And there would have been easier ways to knit this, but what I love about Bellamy's work is that she's so particular about making sure everything is mirrored. So it's like this really interesting heart shape, but like all the diagonals, if you look at her sweaters, they're always going to be like, and you never have like, all the diagonals going in the same direction on the front of a sweater. They're always going to be mirrored right on the center line. It's lovely. So thank you all for just, being interested in this project and helping save this bit of history. I did learn one thing this week, and I don't know how she determined this. That book, I think it was like this Fragility of American Textiles or something. What was it called? The Hidden History of American Fashion. That sounds like an awesome book. She somehow in that book she was able to determine that the initial press run of number knitting was 5,000 copies. I don't know how. If you know how someone would determine that, please let me know, because those are the kind of details I would like to know. Like how do people find out about printing history? I don't even know where to go to. And because I mean, I guess I'm a researcher, but not like in the traditional sense, like, the university, you know, letters after my last name and all that. I really I'm not familiar with the process of like going into to archives and research places and like finding out where all this information is hidden. I have one more thing that I'm awaiting on, because I did my Google search for Virginia Woods Bellamy in quotes, and like I went until there weren't any more results anymore. And I went down all the rabbit trails, and one of them was from an academic. I think it was an academic library in Maine, and in 2016, they had a list of, it was like unrecorded correspondence or unentered correspondence from Maine writers. And so Bellamy was a poet. She had a published book. I think it might have been after she passed, but she used to publish a bunch of poems in the New Yorker magazine. So she was a published author in addition to number knitting. And so she is listed as a Maine author. And somehow somebody got correspondence to and from her, and the company that she partnered with, and I don't know, I'm a little fuzzy on the details. Somehow she was very closely involved with a company called the Bond Wheelwright Company, and I don't know what their relation was with two Crown publishers who published this book, but I do know that throughout the book there is a little boy pictured a number of times, and his last name is Wheelwright. And so somehow she was friends with the people at the Bond Wheelwright Company. And so anyway, after Virginia passed, I think it was in 79, after she passed, the Bond Wheelwright Company wrote some sort of endearing letter or memo or something about Virginia. And that document is among the correspondence in this library in Maine that has never been like scanned or entered into public record. So that is also something I'm working on getting a copy of. So stay tuned for that. So I got two things in the works that I'm trying to obtain. First one is the pamphlet from McCall's from Illinois, and the second one is this correspondence from the library in Maine. So stay tuned. And again, I thank you so much for coming and for the little hiccup that we had when I got started, because, well, I'm a me. Welcome to my world. I have a hard time with certain tasks, and apparently time zones is one of those tasks that I struggle with. So thanks for coming. I really appreciate it. And next week I'm going to be back on East Coast time, so I'm going to show up at the right time. And I promise I will show up at the right time. I will, however, be in another location again. I have a work trip that I have to go, and so I'm going to be on the East Coast on the work trip, but I'm going to be here, there next Sunday night as well. And because I'm on vacation this week, I'll probably visit some yarn shops, and I might have a couple of new skeins to show off. I don't know, but I think I will have made further progress on my little explorations, my attempts to make these things. So, um, maybe it was just for fun, and I don't know what I'll do with that knowledge. But anyway, I'll have a lot more, I'm sure, a lot more to talk about for knitting wise next week. Thanks for coming. Do you all have any questions or comments before I sign off for the evening? No? Okay. Thanks again. And I'm so glad that you're here and for being a part of, um, oh, Karen says she's having trouble with Ravelry. What is the trouble? I finally did post my project in there. And so if you, oh, go, I'll post a link here, but go to the Ravelry number knitting group. Hopefully you know where that is. The number knitting group on Ravelry, and it should be like at the thread, like the third or fourth one down. Um, and I just posted in there like, here's the, the knit along, and I think maybe one other person has posted besides me, because I'm new to knit alongs and like what the process is. I'm just kind of making it up as I go. But yeah, I'll even see if I can find the link real quick. Number knitting Ravelry. Yeah, here it is. Copy link. It's called KAL Tropical Leaf Car Throw. There you go. And you can post your pictures in there. You can also post your project as a like an official Ravelry project and link to the pattern from um, from your project. And so that way, when someone like clicks on the tropical leaf car throw pattern in Ravelry, it'll show however many projects are associated with it, and so people will be able to find the pictures for it later on. Um, yeah, and I'll put that in the description. It is an awesome group. It is. I agree. And I'm so glad that you came and are doing modular knitting with me as we figure it out together. It's great. All right, folks. It's been fun. Thanks again. And I will see you I will see you next week. All right? Thanks. Bye.